Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to this special roundtable on India-Russia relations being organized by the India's World magazine. We are organizing this to mark the special issue on India-Russia relations that we sort of brought out earlier this month, called the Moscow Connect, and everyone sitting here has been instrumental in bringing this out. Professor Raja Mohan, who is the chair of the editorial board of India's World, has the last word in the issue as always. We have Fyodor Lukyanov, Saran, Vasily Kashin. All of them have written articles in this issue. In fact, Ambassador Saran has the lead piece, what we call the argument piece in the magazine. And Nandan was instrumental in making sure that we have all the necessary contributions in this issue. So, on behalf of India's World, may I welcome all of you to this special roundtable on India-Russia relations. I will hand it over to Ambassador Saran, who was India's ambassador to the Russian Federation, and is currently the director of the NatStat, the think tank based out of New Delhi. Over to you, Ambassador Saran.
Thank you, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here on this seminar to launch the special edition of this publication. Firstly, I have to compliment you on the quality and the kind of leadership that both you and Raj are exercising on this venture. It's very, very commendable. I hope it really, and I'm confident it'll do really well. So thank you for inviting me, firstly. So on Russia, I think what according to the guidance given by you, we each of the panelists to take for about 7 minutes each, so that for the panelists to respond. So this is the plan. I think we do the speaking in the order of Dr. Vasily Kashin, and the last word to Nandan Unnikrishnan. So let me make a few remarks before we open it up to everyone. The title of your magazine is called India's World, and as I wrote, India's World is not complete without Russia. And it is therefore important that we focus on this relationship to understand its history and its contemporary status, and also its future. The relationship has come into focus largely in the last 3 years after the Ukraine conflict, because for the many decades that I was associated with the relationship, it never found its way into any kind of mainstream commentary or headlines. In fact, it was so at the back of the room that it was almost taken as a granted, and there was nothing very exciting about the relationship, except that it existed as a very, suppose, also of Soviet, definitely, but also of Russian. But it's only the last 3 years that it has acquired this enormous amount of attention, which sometimes I find a little difficult to understand and also to explain, because nothing really has changed in the relationship insofar as the bilateral dimension of it is concerned. If at all, the process of evolution in the relationship is an ongoing one, but I think it got speeded up, let us say, in a sense, and found its first test with the finalization of the nuclear deal with the United States in 2008. And from then on, and then the same year, we had the global financial crisis hitting the West. So that, to my mind, began the process of evolution, and it has been evolving since then. It's taken different speeds of evolution, But that is the process time when it all began to change. And so it predates the current government of Prime Minister Modi. Um, on the regional and global stage, of course, the relationship uh, has been a victim, let us say, of global changes, changes beyond the control of India. But certainly, Russia has been the mover in the changing global scenario. Today, and this is where I think it's important for everyone to reflect, is where we are and how does the relationship look for both countries? How does it feature in their respective national priorities? And what is the future of the relationship? And so this issue also is heavily dependent not just on what we do with each other bilaterally, but also on the global situation, our respective relationships with major powers and with regional powers. And so, in a sense, is there a future for the relationship? Is there justification? Is there a promise in the relationship? Is there a driving force in the relationship? And how much should each side um, focus on this relationship? And what should we do to keep it dynamic? Or should we, um, or do we conclude that the relationship is losing steam and does not require to be tended by both sides, maybe as in the past? One of the major explanatory factors by many observers is that the relationship is driven by sentiment. I think this factor is overplayed. It's an easy explanation, but I don't think it's an accurate one. I think there are much harder reasons for why the two countries still feel it necessary to look at each other. But let us also face facts that some traditional drivers of any bilateral relationship are relatively weak in the case of India-Russia, for example, economy and trade, or people to people. So you have much more of these characteristics present in other relationships. But I would say that um, we should be also cautious, and we should also ask ourselves the question as to why is it that the relationship is still what it is, despite the relatively weak economic and trade linkages between the two of them. And as I mentioned in some of my earlier writings, that clearly bilateral trade and economic exchanges cannot be a, a sole determinant of the nature of a political relationship. So these are some of the issues that are going to and should be the focus of our discussion. The second, the last aspect, of course, is the changes within India and the changes within Russia. So India is changing fast. Russia is also changing. So the question is, how much of a changing India, or rather, how far and how much can Russia be a part of a changing India? And is a changing India going to also impact on its relationship with Russia, given India's changing needs and aspirations and so on? So, discuss. It's a big agenda, because the moment you discuss Russia, you cannot limit yourself only to the bilateral. You have to perforce go into the broader global trends and and shifts. With these words, may I invite Dr. Raja Mohan to kickstart the discussion. Let's hear his views for 7 minutes, and then we move on to our Russian colleagues and friends, beginning with Fyodor Lukyanov. Raja, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Pankaj. Really wonderful to meet all of you online, and I see welcome large number of online participants we see today. It's at least shows, how much interest there is in this subject. I wanted to first say that since we started this venture, one of my pet themes to Happy Mon has been, look, I think we need to do something on Russia. I think that the relationship had become a, shall we say, strategic partnership by faith. that it is really bureaucratized, it has become narrowly G to G. There is no larger sensibility to where the two countries were headed. Therefore, I think for Indian side, at least I'll speak for the Indian side, that we've lost our sensibility to Russia, its history, its role in the world. So it became increasingly a narrow bilateral uh, focus on bilateral. We have these annual meetings. It is just too narrowly focused on bilateral. And I think linked to that it has largely become a G to G relationship. That is, if you go back to the 50s, 60s, the passions of 20th century politics, of course, brought India and Russia in Soviet Union together, at least in domestically. There was an awareness of Soviet Union because of the left-wing politics, as well as the Congress itself had moved to the left. While today the BJP strongly supports the Russia connection, there is very little sensibility to what's happening, as Pankaj said, within Russia, ability to what Russia is happening in Russia's foreign policy. So it's just about India, Russia, and other factors that come into it, like what's happening with China, what's happening with the US. So I think the idea that, look, we need to go beyond this to be able to generate a fresh bout of interest in the Indian elite on engaging Russia. I think that was one major theme we've been talking about, and I'm so glad that this issue came out, which was not just looking at current issues, but looking at Russian studies in India, Russian art, Russian culture. So it's really taking a very, very broad-based look at where these two large countries are on the world stage. The second, I think, a point I wanted to make was really that Indian elite, we need to. That Russia has changed. I mean, I think for many of us, Russia is still seen as a continuation of the Soviet Union, rather than today an actor with its own with own ideas, ideology, and how it sees itself and sees the world is fundamentally, I think, different. And I think many of the interesting movements that have come in Russia, we have very little awareness of those, nor we see the changes within Russia with any purposeful eye. And I think one of the tragedies from our side has been we've not really invested in Russian studies in a fundamental way. And my hope is that there was a time when we, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, when we were growing up, Russian studies was a popular subject, thanks to communists. Russian literature everywhere, Russian, books translated in their millions, which had a grip on the Indian society. But today there's nothing. There's just only the G to G stuff and some medical students going, and now we see Indian labor is going to go to Russia. But I think at the elite level, which is the key, there's been a declining investment, declining engagement on the Indian side, and I think we need to correct this in a very, very important way. A third, I think, point I wanted to make was really that the assumption in Delhi that Russia is always going to fight the West. One of the things we constantly try to tell people, look, Russia is part of the West in some ways. It's part of Europe in historic ways. And that it had a historic role in shaping modern West, as if you want to call it, modern Europe, modern civilization in fundamental ways. But I think the image for the average Indian elite, Russia is opposed to the West. We are uncertain about the West even as we get closer to the West. Therefore, Russia is like a warm blanket we need to keep. And that this is a crutch, mentally a crutch that we need to keep in order to deal with the more uncertain, arrogant, hubristic Americans or increasingly noverish Chinese. So it's really a Linus's blanket rather than a live, complex society that has had this great role in shaping modern world. I mean, in the European balance of power system, since the Congress of Vienna, the Second World War, and the revolutionary stage of Soviet Union, where it had made a global impact. So I think, in some senses, for India, I think hopefully this issue is really the beginning. Study Russia, qua Russia, not because it's the best friend, India's best friend forever, which is the sole signature theme of the foreign policy elite, the political elite, and the cultural elite, which deals with Russia, has shrunk. So therefore, I think studying Russia as a Russia core Russia on its own terms, looking at its internal politics, looking at its international relations, I think we need to reinvest in those in order to build a relationship on a sounder footing. My sense is Putin's visit this time, I think a start has been made to deal with this relationship on the first principles. As Pankaj said, India is changing, Russian foreign policy, Russia's considerations are changing. So this is a good moment, I think, to discard some of the past baggage, approach Russia as a major power, as a consequential power, which is engaged in very, very deep conversations with the US today. Whether it succeeds or not, what we're seeing is really an important phase in Russian engagement with the West, whether it was in the Second World War, whether it is in the détente period, whether it is in the 90s. Today, I think, if you see what Kirill Dmitriev and Steve Witkoff have talked about, they're talking about a different relationship. This is not something we account for, because India, there's always worry about Russia and China, US and China getting together. But there's not enough sensibility about Russia's own complex relationship with the West and how that's important for us to understand Russia in a deeper sense. Because for us, we have no direct quarrels with Russia. Luckily, we're not in shared neighborhood. We don't have any direct problems with each other. So in a sense, we start on a good footing. And then to build on it, the important thing is to see how Russia's engagement with the West is changing, its relationship with China is changing, and where are the points where our intersection is there, and how do we build on that? There, I would really stop by saying it's utter shame that after 75 years of engagement, the trade is so low. If you remove oil and defense, there's nothing. India exports just $5 billion worth of goods to Russia. So I think we need to change that. We need to bring back commerce into it. We need to bring back people-to-people relationship into it, and build on the positive strategic level understandings that we have. So I'll stop here, Pankaj, and I think we can take this from here.
Thank you, Raj. I think you made a very powerful case for why we should adopt a fresh look towards Russia and forget the past and look at Russia for what it is. And you also pointed out to some of the factual realities about the relationship. And so a lot of food for thought here. Let's hear what Fyodor has to say from how India looks and how the relationship looks sitting in Moscow. That would be also very, very interesting. Fyodor Lukyanov, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this invitation, and in particular for the issue, which is, from my point of view, absolutely brilliant and extremely timely. Of course, I agree with most of what Raja Mohan just said about necessity to learn much about each other. But I would start with another thing, which actually supports the argument of Siraja. Yes, indeed, it would be great if Indians and other big nations would invest more in Russia studies. No harm at all, and it's important to know about each other. The same matters for us vis-a-vis India, vis-a-vis other big partners. But what is to some extent more important here, being on the Russian side, I think we need to invest more in Russia studies, not Indian studies. That's because our country, as the whole world, is going through the absolutely historic changes, unbelievable changes, sometimes in parallel, sometimes not. And when it comes to Russia, I think still we have no time to discuss in details Russian situation, constellation. But what is very important to understand, and I try to to convey to my foreign friends and colleagues all the time. This conflict is of a very complicated nature. I mean, Russia-Ukraine. It started actually as an attempt by the Russian side to influence the international environment. I mean, the security arrangements as they emerged in Europe after the end of the Cold War. And that was, if we go back to the initial stage, the pre-war situation with this memorandum of Russian foreign ministry, and then first months or two of the war before and during the so-called Istanbul process, Istanbul negotiations. That was about it particularly. That was about a Russian related reaction to the expansion of the West towards the former Soviet and former Russian territories. And that was the main point in the whole operation. It's not an accident that both President Putin and many Russian officials, Minister Lavrov and others, they keep saying that we need to address the roots, the root causes of the conflict, and that is mainly about the security situation in Europe after the end of the Cold War. But since it has not been addressed properly before the war and during the war, I mean that this message has never arrived and has never been received by the opposite side, Europeans and Americans, and the idea on their side was just the opposite, to finally impose the principles of the post-Cold War European architecture on Russia, delivering a strategic defeat or by other means, but no compromises, no discussions, nothing. And after that, since the nature of war started to change, so now we have a completely or much different situation. And in this situation, the main thing is not only and not so much, I would dare to say, about the security architecture in Europe. It's about the self-determination of Russia. What is Russia? Where and how Russia ends? Where and how Russia starts? And so on. And that's why the territorial issue, which was not that important at the beginning, never emphasized in President Putin's statements before the war and the first stage, now it is getting to be very important. But what I want to say, what I want to emphasize, and that has to do with Russian-Indian relationship as well. Russia is going through the very difficult transformation from the post-Soviet period, where we had a continuation, a mental continuation of the Soviet time, to something else, to the self-determination as a nation, which is not the successor of the Soviet Union, but the nation per se. It might sound for our audience, especially foreign audience, a bit strange, but I think that in the contemporary situation, this is very important. That can be applied to the Ukrainian side too. Ukraine is fighting for its self-determination, and no one knows how at the end it will be. And that means that our strategies for the tactics for the short time period and strategies for the middle term and long term will be primarily determined by this, by the internal transformation. Russia will formulate its relationship with other countries through the lenses of this domestic transformation, increasingly. Second point, what Siraja mentioned, and everybody, all of us mentioned all the time about the West, India, which is leaning towards the West or towards Russia or other countries. I think it's an example of the outdated approach. What is the West now? So the West, as we knew it from the period of the Cold War and the post-Cold War time, is over. And what we see today is anything but a collective West or a political West. The struggle between United States and Denmark might look like a caricature, and I still have no enough fantasy to imagine a war between US and Danes. But this is a reflection and a manifestation of the very simple fact. NATO and the Atlantic community, transatlantic ties, was not something which did exist forever, did exist in the past. That emerged during the Cold War as a response to circumstances of that time. Now those circumstances are over completely. They are not in place anymore. And we see crisis of all institutions in the world. And those institutions, among those institutions, I mean institutions which emerged after the Second World War, NATO is one of them. Why should we believe that NATO will survive while other institutions will decline? So I think it's absolutely logical, and we will see much more of that. And that's not about Mr. Trump particularly, no, personally. It's about the changing atmosphere. Point number 3, and that is what I wrote in the piece in this issue. Multipolarity. Yes, multipolarity is here. The problem is that the manifestation of multipolarity is being now determined by President Trump. He is the leader of the multipolar world today in his understanding, and this understanding means that yes, indeed, that's a multipolar world. But United States is the most powerful pole, and all other poles should be subordinated to it because it's stronger. It's just one criteria strength. And I think this kind of multipolarity we are witnessing now vis-a-vis allies of the United States, vis-a-vis enemies of the United States. So we spoke about multipolarity for many decades. Now it is here. It's slightly different, to put it mildly, than we envisaged, but it is reality of today's world. Point number 3 is that, point number 4 is that it means, and now we arrive finally to the Russian-Indian relationship. The idea of President Trump is very simple. Since he believes, this is not ungrounded, that the United States is stronger than any other power in the world so far. Some has some limitations vis-a-vis China, vis-a-vis Russia, vis-a-vis India, but at the end of the day, the combined strength, combined potential of the United States is bigger than anybody's. And because of this, he's very keen to have a relationship on the principle one-on-one with each country separately, which is, from his point of view, pretty rational. That's why he hates any institutions which try to unite countries and to coordinate countries. He hates the European Union, absolutely. He hates BRICS, and he said it many, many times. And that brings me to my final point. I think just because of that, since President Trump wants us to be divided, to deal with the United States on the one-on-one basis, that's the biggest reason. Whatever will happen in India, in Russia, between India and Russia, in the region, but this is the principle which will help us to survive in the world of Trumpian multipolarity. Thank you.
Thank you, Fyodor. That was absolutely fantastic for your comments. I think you have touched upon some very fundamental issues, beginning with the war in Ukraine, and the whole question of the identity of Russia as Russia itself or as a successor state, and how long can it live in its identity as just being called a successor state. And of course, I think what you have talked about in terms of Europe, which has thrown up some very important points, including the whole question of the future and the present of NATO, as well as multipolarity. And I think you have tried to position the India-Russia relationship in the broader macro global context, which I think is very interesting and perhaps necessary if we have to do justice to both our nations as powers which have some systemic importance on the global stage. May I now call upon Mr. Vasily Kashin, please, to make his remarks for 7 minutes. Floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. I would focus rather on the positive sides of our developments, of our changes, which were caused by internal transformation of Russia, mentioned by Fyodor, and also by the ongoing breaking up of the previous international order. I should say that in spite of the fact that our cooperation still far from what we would desire, we made tremendous progress during the period of war, and by now Russia is already a significant economic partner of India. We had our trade volume, which is quadruplied, and there are already new dimensions of our cooperation. One of them is steadily growing influx of the Indian workers into Russia, which is closely connected to the internal dynamic, which is lowest unemployment in the Russian history and ongoing industrialization. This is something which will be a long-term trend, and in the coming years will have a lasting impact on our relations. The structure of our trade relations remains unsatisfactory, but still, we can hope that in coming years, one of two things might happen. Either Russia achieves partial stabilization or even partial normalization of its relations with the United States, which would remove the threat of secondary sanctions, or the development of new financial instruments for serving international trade will bring us to a point where we would be much less dependent from the threat of these sanctions. And this is basically what happened in our relations with China. Chinese factor is, of course, a very important factor in Russian-Indian partnership. And for many years, it was considered to be an irritant because Indians were concerned about Russian close ties with China. And at the same time, Chinese were not always happy with Russian-Indian cooperation in defense, which sometimes included some very sensitive projects directly harming Chinese interests. However, now we are going to have additional drivers for deepening our relations precisely because of China. China is facing a long-term structural economic crisis, severe deflation, and the Chinese are trying to get out of this crisis by effectively expanding and subsidizing their exports, which already has created problems in their trade relations with quite a number of developing countries, including Turkey, some Latin American countries. Russia had to take some measures to protect the internal market, and there will be much stronger interest in the diversification of the Russian external trade ties. We are specifically interested in getting more of the Indian products to the Russian market, and that absolutely suits our long-term goals of reforming the economy, reducing inflation, etc. All of that will require us to to overcome certain technical difficulties, but there are efforts by both governments to do that. We are moving, of course, to a new world with much weakened international institutions, and this will be the world based on economic and military coercion, which is widely practiced by the United States, but will be practiced by other countries as well. And it's especially valuable that we don't have any acute differences on the international arena. Our interests mostly coincide, and we are provider of commodities and critical technologies, and India is a potentially huge provider of industrial goods for us. We have relatively well complementary economic structures, and I think the trend is generally positive. There will be even a future for our for our military cooperation, because we see that in today's world, military technical dependence on the United States might be extremely dangerous, and it could be used against you at any moment. At the same time, there will be greater destabilization of the whole international system, growing role of military factor, and having strong partners is essential. Basically, we see that there's huge value, for example, for that reasons, for relations between Russia and North Korea, because North Korea was able to supply Russia with, according to the Western estimates, with a number of artillery shells equal to what the whole West supplied to Ukraine. That's what counts in today's world, not GDP numbers. And that means that we are on a positive trend. Chinese factor will provide us, as well as American factor would provide us with a number of important drivers to come closer together. And in several years, the picture of Russian-Indian cooperation could be much more diversified and positive than it is now. Thank you.
Thank you, Vasily. Thank you very much for beginning your remarks with your comment about the flow of Indian labor or workers and human resources to Russia. I think this is it's the first time it's happened in living memory. If you leave aside medical students and all of that, it has never ever happened. So this is really a historic shift in the relationship, and it goes to the point about the complementarity of the two economies that you mentioned. I'm also glad that you spent some time talking about China and the impact of China on the relationship. So clearly, we have Russia, China, the United States, India, all seem to be kind of engaged and impacting each other, their bilateral relationships impacting on the other. But your sense that the relationship, economically speaking, and in terms of trade, is in the midst of transformation is a very well taken point. So I think we have enough room for enough food for thought here for the discussion. But the last word goes to Nandan Unnikrishnan. And Nandan, you have the floor, please.
Thank you so much, Pankaj. It's actually difficult for me to add anything in relation to what has already been said in the fantastic presentations. Raja Mohan's overview was outstanding. Fyodor has given us tremendous insights into what is driving Russia today. And Vasily has more or less looked at the various factors that will drive the Indo-Russian relationship. And he's given it a I would say, a very positive spin. I don't want to detract from that positive spin at this point of time. So, therefore, let me try and look at some of the broader aspects of our relationship, which, in my opinion, are important and would come back to the same issue that both countries need to study each other more seriously, both at the academic and the expert level, including the government level. Because in my book, and I'm sorry to say this, I'm not trying to boast, but I have been involved with observing Russia since the late 80s. And what I see is uh, partly something that Raja Mohan reflected, that there is a declining level of expertise. I have to only say that it's a declining level in both countries. It's not just in India, it applies to Russia too. Although in the last 7 to 8 years, in Russia at least, there is a significant change. There are some very good India scholars developing. But anyhow, leaving that aside, I think we have to look at 3 or 4 factors. One is, of course, the political relationship, the economic relationship. And I would say that at the political level, uh, I would say that the relationship, despite some difficulties, despite the current turmoil, the relationship is in a positive era, a positive space, because all said and done, we need each other. Whatever happens, India is not yet a great power, but wants to be a great power. Russia is a great power. And if India wants to be at that table, India needs to be able to have good relationships with all the existing great powers, be it USA, Russia, China. And when I say good, I don't necessarily mean friendly, but working relationships, working understanding with all of them. There are some things that India and Russia share which we may not share with the United States, for example. Russia and India both don't want a global hegemon. We loathe the idea of global hegemony. We loathe the idea of Asian hegemony. So, this is something that is going to keep Russia and India engaged with each other. And I don't want to go into it in greater detail because Vasily has already mentioned some of it. At the second level, if India is to grow, and India is already close to a $4 trillion economy, and if it is to grow further, India is going to become a humongous consumer of natural resources. And whether we like it or not, Russia is one of the largest uh, proprietors, if you want, of abundant natural resources. And so, therefore, it would be but natural that India looks at Russia as a long term supplier of these natural resources for India's development. Also, at this point of time, India may not have surplus capital to export, but it does definitely have surplus labor. And that is something that Russia is in dire need of. Vasily also mentioned it. It's a long term need. And this, I think, at the economic level, is probably going to be, for the short term and the medium term, the biggest drivers that are going to keep us together. I agree with Raja Mohan that the sentiment in the relationship is rather exaggerated uh, because we have arrived at generations both in India and Russia which have a very vague notion of the historical jointness that was there between the two countries. But at the same time, I would like to warn that we also have to be prepared for some changes in the relationship, in the sense that, we have had traditional drivers, whether in Soviet times and in Russian times, defense, energy, peace. have been the traditional drivers of the economic relationship. If India wants to be a great power, India has to move away from dependence, and Vasily warned us about dependence on the Americans, but we have to move away from dependence on anyone. I don't think a great power can be one which lives on imported arms. We will have to make our own defense industry strong. We'll have to supply our own basic defense requirements. And maybe Russia can help in this sense that it could provide us with some amount of know-how to help India set up a world-class defense industry or a defense environment, defense industrial environment. But Russia has to be prepared that India is not going to look only at Russia. India is going to try and look at what it can acquire the best around the world. India today, in some ways, can afford a certain amount of leeway in that direction. So we need the caution. I'm bringing this up because I think we need to look more seriously at how to diversify the relationship. It is not enough to say that India can supplant China in the Russian market with X amount of goods. The point is, we have to specifically identify what kind of goods these are. Does India produce them at all? Should India be looking at starting to produce them? Is there such a large market? I mean, these are multiple questions that have to be answered. And unfortunately, I think neither the expertise or the experts in Russia or in India have clear-cut answers to these questions. The final point I would like to make is that, as our economies grow and Russia's development takes place, we are going to need different partners for our different growth areas. And this is going to lead to changes in perception of each other. I have very little doubt that India in the nearest decade is going to look more towards the West. Although I agree with Fyodor that the combined West, as we saw it in the past, does not exist. But in terms of finance, resource, India has to face challenges of climate change. And those challenges, the technologies and the finance, reside to a large extent in the West. Given India's complicated relationship with China, we are unlikely to go to China for solutions in these areas. So I repeat, we need to engage deeper to try and understand, pointed out, government to government relationship, which has served us very, very well so far. But we have now reached a stage where we need to see the elites engaged with each other. We need to see economic engagement at a far more diversified and wider scale than has existed till now. So while I share the optimism that Vasily imbued his presentation with, I am also not entirely overcome with sentiment, with that optimistic sentiment. I think there are underwater stones that we need to navigate carefully in the bilateral relationship. Thank you.
Thank you, Nandan, for that reality check. I mean, you have spoken about the need to study each other, which is a common sentiment, I think, across the panel. The question of diversification, while pointing out what could be possible natural complementarities in the coming years between India and Russia. But you also interestingly emphasize the fact that both countries need each other. And that's also quite interesting. So I think we can open the floor because we don't have much time left from what we have been told by Happymon. So I see 3 questions in the chat box. But Happimon, would you like to guide us through on how to take up these questions? Should we take it up in the order in which?
I think that's
have,
that's probably a good idea. In the
posted.
order that they are mentioned, we are keeping certain questions open. So you may want to pick any of those open questions for whoever you think it is appropriate for.
Yeah, good. So I think, the first two questions relate to something which we haven't touched upon, which is the arms control and the strategic issues on nuclear deterrence and so on. So there's one question about whether Russia is in talks with the United States on arms control treaties, and linked to that is the question about whether China has been brought in to the talks. So maybe we get our Russian colleagues to respond to these. It's an interesting set of two questions. They link to each other.
Yes, thank you very much. So concerning China, this is very simple. Chinese position is still to avoid any arms control talks on the grounds that Chinese nuclear arsenal is still far below the arsenals of United States and Russia. China will not conduct any talks on unequal basis. So talks will only be possible after either the US and Russia reduce their arsenals to Chinese level, or Chinese arsenal increases to Russian or American level. In reality, as we know, Chinese nuclear forces are increasing very fast, but China is avoiding any kind of statements or transparency on this issue. As for the United States, American policy in nuclear weapons is also undergoing rapid changes. President Trump did not respond to President Putin's initiative about moratorium on increase of the nuclear weapons beyond the level of the New START treaty, and that is because, at least as it could be understood from the contacts with US experts and some of the statements, this is because he's planning significant changes, quite possibly a process of so-called uploading of nuclear warheads, increasing number of deployed nuclear warheads, the existing missiles. So the whole arms control system has basically already fallen apart, and there are no signs that we will have any talks in the foreseeable future. Thank you.
Yeah. Does Fyodor want to comment or?
I can just add one thing to the second part about the United States. Yes, we don't see any interest on the American side to engage in such kind of talks. What President Trump said in his recent interview for the New York Times, was very clear. Okay, expires, so what? It expires. And I think that conceptually, not only because what Vasily said, the particular plans of the administration, but there is a conceptual reason. The philosophy of the current administration, in general, not vis-a-vis arms control, but in general, no limitations for the United States, no binding agreements which can limit the US capacity to take decisions. That's it. And that will be applied to all spheres, including the arms control.
Thank you. I think we're obviously highly concerned with these kind of sentiments and the way you both have described it, that Vasily said that the arms control process is basically broken down, and you've added to that. So I think all of this doesn't portend very well for global strategic stability. And there are more questions than answers, it seems. But let's continue. I'll go in the order of the questions. Aryaman is basically asking that when Nandan says that India and Russia have been against global hegemony, His question is whether the Russian ambivalence to global hegemony arises from some kind of a principled stand about not wanting global hegemony, or is it because it feels it may not be able to achieve the global hegemony uh, uh, that is what it is. So, Nandan, I mean, do you think it's a question of the Russian position is driven by lack of capability or principal position? And of course, the Russian participants are most welcome to.
No, I firstly think, of course, when such luminaries like Fyodor and Vasily are here, they should be the moment before leaving them to respond to the question. I was looking at Russian history, and I'm talking not of modern Russia, I'm talking of Tsarist Russia, even Peter the Great. Russia had multiple opportunities to dominate Europe, but it never did so. So I am myself curious about this. I mean, what is it that is there in the Russian strategic mind that moves them away from the idea of hegemony, even at, let's say, forget global level, even at a European level, when they had that capability? I mean, they did reshape, as Raja Mohan pointed out, European politics. I mean, after all, who can forget that it was Tsar Alexander who led the parade in Paris after the 1812 victory over Napoleon. So they were there, and after World War II, Russian troops were all the way there in Vienna and across. So I don't know. It's a question that I would love to hear the Russian answer.
One of you likes to jump in.
Pankaj, can I just come in and then
Sure, Raj. Yeah.
apologies to leave soon.
Please.
I think on arms control, I think if NATO is going, if WTO doesn't exist, so I think for us to hang on to arms control as a principal vehicle, I think is again, I think the Russians and Americans were engaged in a deep way for a long, long time. But my sense is that phase is gone. It's again like everything else, whether it's trade, whether it is global order, institutions, everything is again going to be taken from first principles. Second, I think it's interesting. Well, China is not willing to talk about nuclear weapons because it's still below the Russia and American level, but it's quite happy to engage with Americans on AI. In fact, that gives them the same kind of status like Russians enjoyed for a long time. That in fact, Biden administration started this dialogue with the Chinese on AI, how to prevent from affecting nuclear balance, accidental war, etc., etc. So I think the arms control is a special place, and the Chinese are quite happy as a leading power in AI to be able to deal with the Americans on that basis. And I think Americans are going out of the way to actually put the Chinese as AI power. For Indians, I think I would just conclude with this thought. Just when Russians and Americans were actually getting too close on the nuclear stuff, many in Delhi were very worried in the 70s. On the NPT, for example, Russians and the Americans had the similar positions. Or later in 95, post-91, the emphasis on non-proliferation as a central element. Again, India had problems. So I think I would say, look, take this as a fresh perspective, rather than what is good or what is bad enough from a traditional angle. Similarly, for India, I think US-China dialogue on AI could set the rules, which actually should worry both Russia and us. That look, it is the Americans and the Chinese that are going to set the new rules, new standards on AI, which has a far more economic consequence than the nuclear energies have had. So I think this is something India and Russia should be able to engage and say, look, we're not going to just let two countries set the rules. We need to work together to develop broader rules. And I think I would say we should join the Europeans, whoever else is willing to join this endeavor.
Yeah,
I take your leave. Yeah. Pankaj, I'm sorry I had to leave a bit.
No, thank you for your fantastic insight on the last point. I think it was very important to talk about the AI aspect of the new frontier for technology and the US-China conversation. But thank you so much, Raj. Thank you.
Yeah, Narasimhan also wanted to come in, Pankaj sir.
So who? Vasily?
General Narasimhan.
Oh, yes. Please, I was just going by the order of the questions, but Joe, yeah, okay, sure. General Narasimhan, yes, please.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. we
Yeah.
can.
2 points I wanted to mention on this nuclear dialogue. One is, of course, Chinese have set down certain conditions for this nuclear dialogue to take place, which means they have said that if everybody else is actually willing to forego the nuclear weapons in a verifiable manner, then they will be entering into the talks. There is one. Second, there have been some talks between China and US on the nuclear issues. I mean, as early as as late as last year, there have been some talks there. So it is not that they are engaging, but they don't want to engage in a manner that they are at a disadvantage. So that is something which is a given. That's what I thought I'll mention here.
Oh, valid. Thank you, General Narasimhan. I mean, this whole business of getting China into the Russia-US is actually also directly impacting us. Supplementary comment on, I think one of the speakers did talk about Trump's dislike for BRICS. But is there anything more to amplify that whether we can engage more with BRICS? I think one of those Russian speakers also rightly mentioned that we may need to work much more together with each other to kind of respond to the Trumpian era and so on. But
If I may just add one sentence.
Yeah, sure.
First of all, yes, I think, again, conceptually, we need to demonstrate BRICS countries, other countries outside the US area, that we are not afraid to work together, not against the United States, but to coordinate, to strengthen ourselves. That's absolutely important. We see that the Donald Trump has a very typical psychology. He strikes hardest those who cannot respond. And those who can respond, including for even the Houthi movement in Yemen, he prefers to avoid. And in this regard, I think what Europeans are doing, that's absolutely crazy. They really support his intention. And one thing which is absolutely crucial for BRICS, I understand that it's the most complicated and most troublesome one, but this is the key to US power. This is dollar monopoly. If we will find ways how to, again, not against the United States, but simply to trade without using their financial instruments, that will be the biggest blow to the US hegemony.
Fyodor, if you may also respond to the question on hegemony.
Hegemony, I think, first of all, Nandan, you're absolutely right. The security psychology of Russia is not about to be hegemon, it's about to extend buffer zones. And as for today's situation, I think no one in Russia has, even the craziest imperialists whom we have some of them, no one speaks about global hegemony. It's absolutely obvious to everybody. It's not available. It's not needed. Russia is not the Soviet Union. It will never be.
Good. So let's move on quickly because I'm sure Happy Mon's going to ring the bell anytime. RELOS, the Military Logistics Pact, India, Russia. Any comments and its implications for the Indian Ocean and the Arctic regions? Any comments on this, on the RELOS? And I think it's Fyodor or Vasily. Any comments on this?
Well,
logistics agreement.
I think the impact of that would depend greatly on Indian interest in Arctic in the security sense, and that's far from being clear. I mean, there is some kind of expressed interest, but to my understanding, not much has been done in reality because it's a huge and technically complex issue. Russia is currently reassessing its future military posture in a major way, and I think it will be clear the future planning, the future Russian military posture will be more or less clear in coming years, because as a result of the Ukrainian war, of all previous programs assessment of what the future Russian armed forces will look like, what we should be prepared for. And we are at the kind of crossroads. Probably will be able to make any detailed conclusions in like couple of years concerning this.
Thank you. Got his hand raised. So,
I just wanted to make a quick point about India and China. In fact, I'm going to also to flag the magazine. I'm going to read out this bit from Vasily's article, in which he concludes by the argument that what remains one of the key principles of Russia's foreign policy will be to closely cooperate with Asian powers, including China, in order to undermine the US policies and build a new multipolar world order. Russia, however, carefully avoids any choices that would reduce its strategic autonomy and force it to be tied to just one power in Asia. That's a fantastic observation. I just want to sort of add one point and request of the two. For us, this actually leads to a very intricate trilemma in the region for India, involving India, Russia, and China. I think how India and Russia can manage this trilemma going forward is going to be very important for the two powers and their sort of future relationship as it were. I'm wondering whether Vasily or Fyodor have any thoughts on how do we manage this trilemma involving China, Russia, and India, because this is not as simple as probably we think sometimes. I think it's going to be very complicated. It will determine and shape the relationship going forward.
yeah, absolutely. I think there are two elephants in the room, not just China. There is the other elephant also. So we have the United States and China. But yes, please, Fyodor, please, and then Vasily or Vasily first, whichever way you like to do it.
Oh, maybe further first, and I will follow.
Sure.
Okay. It's not too much to say. I think point number one, it's absolutely crucial that three major powers in the world beyond the United States should find ways how to cooperate and coordinate their actions vis-a-vis such kind of the United States. United States today is, I wouldn't say it's profoundly different from we know from the past, but it's significantly different because of personal characteristics of President Trump. And that means that his activities probably will push us further to necessity to a dialogue. And we see that the situation today is better between those three states in this triangle than it used to be 2 years ago, for example. But having said that, of course, I'm very much aware how much deep the mistrust in India vis-a-vis China is. I think that issues which are of universal importance, for example, what I already mentioned about this capacity to operate on the economic field beyond the US sphere, that is in interest of anybody, whatever relationship we have between particular countries. And I'm pretty sure that that will be developed because, again, the idea of the United States, divide and conquer, and that's what they will continue to do with Trump or without Trump. And from my point of view, the conclusion from this is very simple: not to allow them to do it.
Yeah,
Vasily, please.
I should say that there is a very strong need for joint actions by BRICS countries, especially by India, Russia, and China, to jointly preserve what remains of the international order, because already some quite unprecedented things happened, and we all failed to react. And mostly they're happening in Latin America, because last year Trump intervened into internal affairs of a BRIC member Brazil and imposed sanctions. And this year he conducted his operation in Venezuela. But what's important, after operation in Venezuela, he openly stated that it would be a precedent for these kind of operations in other Latin American countries. He openly claimed the right of the United States to actually define how the Latin American external ties, external political, military, and economic ties. He said that he wouldn't put up with presence of any outside players in the region, and these are very unprecedented moves. And these countries are very important partners of all three of us, Russia, India, and China. And so far we failed to react because each of us has his own tactical considerations. Russia is engaged in negotiations with Trump over Ukraine. China is discussing its grand trade discussions, some kind of broader agreement, and India has its own track with the American, and this is how the American strategy works. But already they shown their intention to exploit every weakness, and India was pressured not just because of its relations with Russia, but there were absolutely incredible demands to open up Indian markets for a number of goods. And we should work together because we need certain rules which we should commonly preserve.
Great. There are some questions which are related, and I will bunch them in. There are questions on, let's say, how India and Europe can exchange views, interact with each other, build a relationship, and its impact on India-Russia relations. That's one kind of broad question. The other is Central Asia. And there is a third question I see on Afghanistan. Nandan, you want to talk about, and we should get our Russian friends into this conversation about how they see the India-Europe emerging partnership. How do they see prospects for cooperation in Central Asia between India and Russia? And of course, Afghanistan, I mean, we both seem to be making moves with the Taliban in Afghanistan. Is that another geography where India and Russia can actually converge? So, Nandan, you want to go first, and then we question Vasily and then Fyodor?
No, on Europe, of course, it's a complicated relationship. India is very clear why it requires a relationship with Europe. Europe has much to contribute towards India's economic development. I don't think we in India view Europe as much of a security player yet, but it could possibly cooperate with us to establishing, as I said, India's defense industry, but that is something in the future. Russia's relationship with Europe is far more complicated. I leave it to Fyodor and Vasily to tell us about that. Meanwhile, on Central Asia and Afghanistan, yes, we have converging views on the development of security in this region. We view Afghanistan and Central Asia as our extended neighborhood, but we are also aware of the fact that all external powers are very sensitive to other external powers coming into this area. So everyone sort of jealously guards their spheres of influence, as it were. So if anyone has the idea that Russia is necessarily a sort of a stepping stone for India into Central Asia, I would suggest that we think about it again. Yes, there is a possibility of third-party cooperation. There is a possibility of tripartite, as it were, co-op projects. But we have to keep in mind that Central Asia is not just one region. These are 5 different countries, and each of them has their own set of problems. And therefore, I don't think we should lump it as one solution for all. We need to be a little careful. And let us also be clear that there are other external powers who are not going to look kindly to suddenly India, Russia getting together to do something in that region. So we've also had experience which has not been very positive in our cooperation with Russia and Central Asia. So there are a lot of factors that we need to consider before we jump in. But I will re-emphasize this. Central Asia and Afghanistan neighborhood, they are areas where India should pay attention. We cannot allow what used to happen earlier where, somebody visits there and after that, for 5 years, everything is forgotten. That should not be the case. We have to keep our footprint there on a more permanent basis.
Thank you. Thank you, Nandan. Fyodor, would you like to jump in if you have any comments?
As far as Central Asia is concerned, Donald Trump teaches us, all of us, one important lesson. Globalization in the previous form is over, and during this liberal globalization period, everybody told us that neighborhood is not the most important thing. It doesn't matter much because the world is global and you can have partners 10,000 kilometers from you and so on. Trump shows that neighborhood matters, and it matters more than anything else. And I think that all of us should take it into account and operate respectively. Central Asia is our common neighborhood, however it sounds. And development there will have impact both on Russia and India. So that's why we need to work there to the best scenario to coordinate and to work together. But I'm sure that we will continue our efforts even individually. But anyway, we'll be able to consult each other because it's important. And those countries, they are going through their processes of self-determination, and we see how it happens. So it's very important. Europe is a most debated issue here in Russia now. Today and for the pretty foreseeable future, we don't see any opportunity to work with Europe for one simple reason. The more nervous and hysterical Europe is, and they have a lot of reasons to be hysterical, not because of Russia, but because of the United States. The more important is anti-Russian and pro-Ukrainian stance for the European Union, because this is the issue, the only issue which can unify them, because all other issues are rather dividing. The interests and perceptions inside the European Union are very deep. That's why they will try to keep it going as long as possible.
Great. Vasily, any remarks, thoughts on this?
Well, concerning Central Asia, it's important to understand that Central Asian countries are themselves very active and quite skilled on the international arena. And what they're trying to do, they're trying to bring as many outside players into the region as possible. They have record number of C5+1 formats with almost every big economy in the world, with Russia, European Union, individual countries of European Union, United States, Japan, South Korea, etc. And absolutely, the more external powers are coming into the region, the better. Is it bad for Russia? No. Russia is only concerned by the prospect of, if such prospect exists, of some foreign power actually taking over, getting disproportionate influence on some Central Asian countries, so it can be used against Russia in some kind of big geopolitical game. If India is interested in participation of in taking part in the development of the region, that would be absolutely positive, and we could find ways to cooperate. But basically, I know that India has been active in the regional security since 1990s. Then this activity was significantly reduced. If it is renewed in various forms, that is absolutely positive for everyone, I think.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think there is a very high degree of a pull factor in Central Asia to pull in India in their whole strategic landscape. So that's good. Now, there's one question which I think is very specific, which is on the Indian labor and whether Russia can, and what safety mechanisms are being put in place to make sure that this new dimension of the relationship, which is export of Indian manpower, is not abused or is not exploited. And of course, the question also talks about whether they should be allowed to get into the Ukraine conflict. But on the general issue about how will Russia deal with this new phenomenon of a large number of Indian manpower entering the Russian workforce. I mean, other regions of the world have experience, the Gulf, parts of Africa, Europe, America, but for Russia, it's the first time. Any thoughts? I mean, it's a new start, but we have to play it carefully so that it doesn't misfire.
So that's a big debate in Russia now about migration. Enormous debate, one of the most important internally. We will need hours to discuss about particular part of Indian labor force. I think it's actually one of the least problematic so far, because we have no spontaneous inflow of people from India. We have migration, we have arrival of people based on very clearly defined documents and agreements with particular kind of cities, for example, or local authorities. And everything is more or less regulated. And this is, if it is so from the beginning, then we can expect much less problems than we have with other sources of migration from Central Asia, for example. So this is, I agree, this is a new start, and that might become a positive prototype for relationship with that.
Thank you. Very useful. So we now have, what do we have? Well, we have one more question, which is about Indian studies in Russia. And by the way, we have a whole series of questions from anonymous attendee on various aspects of Russia, which is about the Ukraine conflict and war. And if any of the Russian participants wants to get into it, most welcome. Otherwise, I think we've touched upon a lot of these issues on Russia and Europe. But if we just get back to the bilateral part on the India aspect, how do we promote the study of each other's countries? That's one question which has baffled a lot of people. What is the appetite? What are the opportunities, especially among the current generation of scholars and academics and even media? Do we understand each other as much as we should. That's really a big challenge. It's always been, but I think um, since we began the conversation with that and India's world, the essay is very much part of this attempt to raise awareness. Any comments, Nandan? Would you like to offer some suggestions how we can fill this gap?
Thank you, Pankaj. I think it's very complex. It's related to multiple issues. At the end of the day, the attraction of people into the area of Russia studies is also linked to job availability. At the end of the day, if someone does a PhD, does a whatever degree, it is also seeking a job. So maybe if efforts are made to open Russia study departments in universities across the country, then you will have jobs which will be required to be filled. You may find an attraction towards Russia studies. Although even today, if you look at JNU, there are any number of students doing their PhDs in the Department of Eurasian Studies. The second thing is, and this I think is a major weakness of at least the Indian side. If you today take students of those interested in Russia or Central Asia across the board in Indian universities, one major flaw I find is that there is very little understanding or very little done towards enhancing skills in Russian language or any Central Asian language. The problem then arises, because these are specific societies, is that you tend to get all your information from English. And English is primarily from an Anglo-Saxon perspective. And that not necessarily the best perspective to have to study Russia. So I keep emphasizing that it is necessary to have the ability to read local sources. In Russia, of course, it's Russian. In Uzbekistan, it would be Uzbek, and so on and so forth. So if an emphasis in India could be made on these two aspects, one is opening a greater number of area studies in universities, also putting emphasis on language studies, I think we should be able to crack it. Russia is doing a good job, in my opinion, but it'll take time to show its fruit.
So, is Indian studies showing any signs of revival in Russia? I mean, across the spectrum, in terms of contemporary India, is there any interest among the Russian current generation? Any, Vasily or Fyodor, would you like to reflect on this?
Yeah, if I may, I think there is already certain growth in interest in Indian studies, and I think it's broadly following the pattern of the development of the interest in China, something like 30 years ago, when when Soviet Union and China normalized their relations in 1989. Initially, in the early stage of relationship development, number of people studying language was completely insignificant, and at that time, Moscow State University, the biggest university in the country, probably produced just less than 20 trained sinologists per year, people who actually could speak Chinese language. Now we have dozens of thousands of people actually studying Chinese at any given time, and that has been a process. People follow the economic trends. Sometimes there are periods of hype about certain language. I think if we are successful in opening up markets and moving forward in our economic relationship, and we just do sufficient effort to advertise that to the people, they would move towards studying the languages of each other, and but it's just a matter of time. It's not a big issue. Currently, we have very acute deficit of experts in India, and I believe in India there is deficit in experts on Russian affairs. I believe it's especially deep and especially acute in the fields which are the most relevant for expanding practical economic cooperation. We don't have enough people who have knowledge about legal systems of each other, about particular industries in Russia or India, about customs law, and so many other things. That will require that means that there is an absolutely huge demand for this.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's a very realistic assessment of the situation, but also you're leaving on a positive, optimistic note. I think this is clearly an area we have to move forward. I think India's World's exercise is geared to generating this kind of a momentum. I've been told we are really badly out of time and we have to finish the discussion. But we want to thank all the participants. Fyodor Lukyanov, Vasily Kashin, Nandan Unnikrishnan, Raja Mohan in absentia. And of course, I want to finally thank Happy Mohan Jacob for inviting me for this lovely discussion and for asking me to contribute to this very prestigious magazine. Thank you all for your time, for your comments, for your insights. And Happy Mohan, back to you.
Thank you, Ambassador Saran, and all the panelists for this fantastic discussion on one of India's most important relationships. Fyodor Lukyanov, Vasily Kashin, Nandan, Ambassador Saran, and Raja. Thank you, for this wonderful discussion. And if I would encourage everybody who have joined us online to take a look at the latest issue of the magazine, the Moscow Connect. There's a lot to sort of chew on, lot to sort of reflect on as far as the relationship is concerned. With this, we will sort of bring this discussion to a close. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening, good afternoon.
Thank you, Happy Mohan. Thank you, and goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
You.